Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Saeyls Online Forum 2022. The purpose of this forum is to give presentations on research categories through Zoom and have an online discussion with other participants. The participants will research on the theme related to their given category and present their results in this forum. Other participants will be able to ask questions during the Q&A session. First, please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Lavanya, and I will be serving as your moderator for this forum. Before we welcome our first presenter, here's a short outline on what our topic is about today. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a major effect on our lives and has caused various changes towards our daily activities, our living culture. In this forum, we will be discussing how has COVID-19 affected the cultures in our lives and society, and should we embrace this new cultural change? Without further ado, let's welcome our first presenter, Kamil Ismakia, to give his presentation.
May I please be allowed to share my slides? Okay. Can you see this? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kamil Ismakia A. Patilia from Philippine Science High School, Eastern Visayas Campus. And of the many topics that I want to discuss about, of the many topics I've made a research about, I want to discuss the cultural response to COVID-19 entitled Through the Lenses of a Filipino. Now, this is, of course, a way of looking at how our culture has changed through the COVID-19 pandemic, how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the way we Filipinos enact our traditions, how we exercise our culture, how we connect with each other. Now, I would like to begin by saying some words of inspiration. Culture is the arts elevated to a set of beliefs by Thomas Wolfe. I believe these words of inspiration will ring true all throughout the presentation, as it perfectly summarizes the idea of what the culture is all about. Now, I'm going to introduce my key talking points. First of all, let me just move this. First of all, I'm going to be talking about communitarianism and tightly knit social bonds in native culture. Communitarianism, which I will be defining further on, as well as tightly knit social bonds. Native culture being Filipino culture, aka the way we practice our gatherings, our beliefs that we have been bestowed upon by our colonial past, with 333 years of Spanish culture, Spanish colonialization that we've adopted, for about 40 years of American occupation. We've also adopted that into our culture. Now, I'll also be discussing on changes to cultural aspects and traditions due to the pandemic, as well as finally discussion on the acceptance or rejection of these changes. I'll also be parting the audience with a few words of like advice. But as an introduction to the research, let me first begin before I give my examples. The research begins by discussing that, as we all know, on the 11th of March 2020, the World Health Organization declared the novel coronavirus a pandemic. The cultural and ethnic traditions of Filipinos that served as the moral and ethnic foundation of our identity were shaken. We suddenly had to adapt to this brand new factor. This was a big health concern, and it severely impacted our traditions in the way that I will be discussing soon. But for the research, we will be analyzing and exploring the local and native cultures, as well as the requisite effects, the necessary effects that we have had to enact, the changes that we have had to take as a response to the pandemic. Now, the purpose of the research is to depart the audience, the listeners, with the consequent adaptations to the Filipino culture as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, as well as whether we should accept these changes for good, whether these changes are just permanent, or whether we should reject these changes in the long run. Also, whether to discuss whether these changes are good at all, or whether these changes will change the traditions, whether our identities will be shaken. Now let's move on. Culture in the Philippines, I'll be giving you some examples of values. Values being how we act, how we present ourselves, how we bring ourselves up, that is. Now, arts being like paintings, dancing, such as those in festivals, as I've also shown on the screen. Music and cinema, cinema being like movies, plays, you know. Now, I'll be showing you an example. Values and religion. As you can see here, Santo Niño devotees attend Mass by the thousands. This is in Cebu, in the Santo Niño Basilica. As you can see here, there are a ton of devotees. I personally have been to one of these. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I was at this basilica, and well, there weren't really this much, but this picture shows how much Filipinos have dedication to Christianity and their belief. This is an example of a painting, the arts, the Bayanihan mural. This is an example of how Bayanihan is practiced. Bayanihan being that originally was a term coined for like people in a village or a town. Houses were built out of bamboo and they could help lift it up as they moved from one place to another. Now this is the Sinulog festival. As you can see, they're engaged in some dancing as a way of expressing the festival. And of course, let me give you an example of cinema, The Fabulous Filipino Brothers. It's a movie on Netflix. I haven't watched all of it, but it's a good movie. Now, we have to discuss, what do you think they have in common? On all four of those, what do you think they have in common? They have communitarianism. As I said, I will be discussing this earlier, and now I'm expounding on it here. Communitarianism is the connection between the individual and the community with family and citizenry-based communal ideals. So for example, the main social unit of communitarianism is the family. It's perfectly represented by the idea of one for all for one. The community is the forefront of communitarianism, as it says in the name. The tightly knit social bonds are a perfect example of communitarianism. Relations in the community, humility, courtesy, respect, modesty, it's all there. There's a structured way of life centered around the family unit. Less assertion and independence present. There's less assertion and independence because it's focused on the family. And social gatherings are an essential part of everyday life, even if it's just like sitting on the table, talking with your family members. For example, there's utang na loob, which is the debt of gratitude. So for example, if someone does good to you, then you'll be obligated to pay it back. Bayanihan, as we've shown earlier, it's now grown into a term of helping the community instead of just like being a word for like lifting the bamboo houses. Po and opo being words that signify respect. So like hello po, if you say that, it means you designate respect to whoever you're talking to. So as we can see here, let's review all of the things again. But you can see communitarianism in this photo because of the way that the devotees are gathered to celebrate their religion. Here you can see communitarianism, as well as here also expressing the religion and faith, and as well as here social gatherings. You can see as they gather around the table, as I said earlier. Now let's discuss the changes in Filipino culture and COVID-19's effects. First of all, let's look at COVID-19 national health responses. Let's give ourselves an example in order to give ourselves a foundation for how we'll see how our traditions change. So for example, first over there, we can see that there have been quarantines and lockdowns, limitations of travel, stay-at-home orders, cancellations of mass gatherings. You can see how that obviously affects the traditions that we celebrate: mass testing and contact tracing, travel restrictions, so people can't just go from like one place to another, especially if families are separated by long distances, if friends are separated by long distances. Now there are travel restrictions, and now social gatherings may or may not continue. There's a highly likely chance that social gatherings will not follow through. So let's take fiestas as an example of COVID-19's effects. Fiestas are a good example because these happen like every a few months, and these happen like nationwide. So maybe like every month it happens somewhere. So it's an acknowledged national traditional occasion. And now we can see that fiestas have been affected. As we can see, there's an example. Tacloban drops fiesta-related events due to COVID-19. COVID-19 kills the 2021 Cagayan de Oro Fiesta. So for the first time in years, no fiesta has graced the joyous Filipino roads because of COVID-19's effects. Because of the effects that we mentioned earlier, quarantines, lockdowns, travel restrictions, no fiestas were able to find their places on the streets. We weren't able to find all of these joyous, momentous occasions. So aside from fiestas, could we apply this to other aspects? What about churches and social gatherings? See on the screen, it says churches and societal gatherings were disrupted. That is what happened. And as what happened to our tightly knit social bonds, cultural values that represented the Filipino identity both grew and diminished during these trying times. Nationalism and sense of unity were cultivated as a result of shared struggles. For example, there was this thing that was developed called a community pantry, where on that pantry you would be given like um sort of like essentials, and everyone could take of them, and it was for free for everyone. But the distance between relatives made family-oriented values pale, because how else would you be able to spend time with your family if you were separated by the distances posed by the issues of the national health responses? So are there any other important details? Well, high contact culture, other changes to way of daily life. Has there been a development of safety culture? Working from home might actually become the new normal, but that's not exactly according to the culture. Okay, so could we accept or reject these changes? No change is absolute regarding value. Of course, you have to inspect the changes one by one. Not all, if any, changes are permanent, and traditions and cultures are not necessarily lost. COVID-19 does not inspire change in cultural patterns of Filipinos. You don't necessarily have to, how do you say it? Just because a tradition changes doesn't mean the essence is lost. Now, I will be moving on to the Q&A session. During the Q&A session, I could also expound by discussing how these changes are seen. Oops. Okay. Are there any questions?
All right, thank you, Carol, for that presentation. Does anyone have a question that they would like to put forward to him?
Hmm. Is it okay if I check like the YouTube live to see if there are questions again?
Cameron, we will be presenting the questions from the YouTube live also, yeah?
Okay, yeah. Oh, okay. Do you think the impact of COVID-19 on culture is the same in all countries? Now, I believe the impact of COVID-19 on culture is not necessarily objectively the same, because every country, every ethnic group has their own expression of their identity. As I said before, culture is the moral and ethnic foundation for identity. Now, the impact of COVID-19 on culture generally is the same. We are forced to change, to adapt on our culture. But on a specific level, I cannot say that it's the same, because, of course, not all ethnic groups, not all countries have the same traditions as we do. For example, as I've said, in the West, they have more of an individualist take more than the Eastern communitarianism ideals. So, for example, the effect on their culture is that you can see how they much like to rebel and protest about all of these lockdowns, whereas people in the East, Filipinos specifically, we haven't really had any of those protests. We stayed at home, although at the cost of our traditions, of course, because now we can't, as I've shown, we can't practice fiestas, for example. But yeah, specifically not the same, but generally every country, every cultural group, ethnic group was forced to adapt their culture in order to prioritize in sanitation and health in these trying times.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we have another question. How does culture change over time? And in your opinion, did the pandemic speed up the process?
Okay, culture changes over time in a way that it adapts to the, how do you say it, like the status quo, right? So we can say that, let's take the 1900s for example. Women back there were given, of course, given less rights, given less opportunities than men. Now through the course of the 20th century, culture has changed over time. As women were given more rights, they were able to more express themselves in our culture. In Filipinos, we haven't really had that much, but our cultures have always I identified us. Okay. And as I can give this from a Filipino viewpoint, okay, our culture changes based on the years of occupation of foreign powers, right? So from 333 years of Spanish culture given to us, and then a few years, a few decades of American occupation, that changes the culture of Filipinos because we adapt to the status quo. The status quo being the occupation of foreign powers. In my opinion, did the pandemic speed up the process? Yes, it sped up the process on how we practice our culture, but not necessarily the ideas of of the traditions that we practice. The only thing that it changes is the way that we handle and express our traditions. For example, we haven't necessarily lost our familial values. We've only lost the ability to effectively practice it because of the national health responses and of the danger that COVID-19 poses.
All right, thank you for that answer. Does anyone else have a question? All right, so we've got another one.
Do you
Do you
think
think these cultures post COVID-19 are reversible and will they wear off over time?
Yes, I think that most, if not all of these new cultures post COVID-19 are reversible. Will they wear off over time? Yes. As the COVID-19 begins to wane and as we begin to open up again, we begin to heal, recover, the cases are dwindling. I believe that these new cultures post COVID-19 are reversible because we've seen, I've discussed that the cultures are brought upon by the responses of COVID-19. They're brought upon by, how do you say it? They're brought upon by the way we react to COVID-19 as a sort of sanitation and health measure. So, for example, if we celebrate mass from live streaming on Facebook or YouTube, of course, as COVID-19 ends, as it wears off, as we go and open up our cities again, we'll be able to attend mass in person. We'll be able to have our fiestas again. We'll be able to visit our family, engage in social gatherings. They will definitely wear off over time because our culture did not necessarily change at its root. And if a culture changes at its root, then of course it's not going to be reversible anymore because it's going to adapt to the status quo. But this only adapts to the status quo in the way that we express it. And of course, it's going to wear off over time.
All right, thank you. All right, that's all from Camille. Now, let's have our next presenter, Nur Aziza binti Samyun, to give her presentation.
Okay, please allow me to show my slides first. Okay. Um, okay, so hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nur Aziza binti Samian, and I am from SMK Tungku Saeyls, Malaysia. Today, I would like to share about my finding from my little research entitled The Effects of COVID-19 Towards Study Culture.
I'm sorry to disturb you, Aziza, but you are not sharing your screen. You can't see your presentation.
Okay, wait. Sorry. Okay, sorry, my fault. Okay. Is it okay now?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay. Before we start, let me define some of the terms that will be used in my presentation. First of all, pandemic is defined as of a disease prevalent over a whole country or the world. Secondly, the definition of effect is a change which is a result or consequence of an action or other cause. And whereas culture is defined as the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular people or society. Our main focus today will be study culture, so I will be using terms like learning styles and study habits. So these are the research questions. First, how does the COVID-19 pandemic affect the student study culture? And second, percentage of students who find the COVID-19 pandemic brings negative effect to their study culture. So my methods of research is by questionnaires that are given via Google Forms. The respondents are from 3 Form 4 classes in my school. There were 16 students from Poyasni, 21 students from Podahlia, and 15 students from Etnisina. So let us proceed with the research findings. It took me 2 days to analyze them. So this is the first pie charts. Firstly, 19% of the students complained that it was hard for them to focus on the screen for a long period of time, while 72% of them got easily distracted during their online classes. In addition, there are at least 78% of the respondents that were unable to join online classes because of their internet connectivity and problems with their devices. There are some problems encountered by the students after the pandemic. First of all, 52% of the students felt awkward when they first met their peers again after the pandemic, whereas 60% of them find it hard to socialize. However, at least 88% of them prefer to communicate to their teachers face-to-face and meet their peers in person rather than through video calls. So this is about their routines. It is also found that majority of the students tend to sleep late during the pandemic. Most of them also admitted that they choose to do their homework at the very last minute and they become highly dependent on the internet to complete their exercises. Furthermore, 68% of them admitted that they love to spend they spend less than 3 hours to do their homework. Most of them love to spend their time by playing online games or watching movies during the pandemic. Another finding is less than 24% of the students spend their time by reading books or completing their exercises. So, the most shocking finding is that 74% of the students get demotivated to score in their examination because of online classes, as you can see here. Okay, and here, as you can see, on a similar note, more than three quarter of the respondents believe that the pandemic has brought negative effects to their study habits. So, the conclusion, based on this little research, I can conclude that first, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought negative effects towards the students' study habits. Second, due to the prolonged movement control order, MCO, the students' motivation to learn has somehow been tarnished. Thus, it is hoped that the reopening school this 4 months will slowly give room for students to readapt and get back to their rhythms so that they will be able to turn challenges to opportunities to gain the best for their future. So that's all from me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Aziza. Now we will be moving on to the Q&A session. Does anyone have a question that they would like to put forward to Aziza?
Hi, Aziza. How do you reduce dependency on the handphones?
Okay, so this is when parents should play a very important role. They should limit the child time spent on their phones. It is advisable that they follow daily routines strictly. No phone should be allowed while they are doing their homework. Furthermore, teachers should nurture high-order thinking skills so that the students will not be able to depend too much on Google.
All right, I hope that answers your
Sorry for that.
question.
Thank you, Aziza.
Okay. So is there any other questions that you would like to put forward to Aziza? All right, so we've got a question from the YouTube Live. The pandemic has brought many negative effects. However, what can students do to excel in school after the pandemic?
Okay, as you see, the pandemic has really brought many negative effects. So, how do working students do that? Okay, so there are many ways for the students to excel in school after the pandemic. First, they could join like extra classes. Especially in my country, there are this one organization that are very famous for their own extra classes, and it really helps many students to excel in their school. And they can also make study groups, as it also helps a lot because I do that myself to catch up with your friends and just to catch up with your friends and learn something more with them. You can also learn from various tutor video, like from YouTube. There are many learning videos that you can watch, and you can learn many things. I also did that before, so I assure you that it's very effective.
All right, thank you. Is there any other questions? All right, so does online learning affect our social skills?
Yes, online learning did affect our social skills, as the restriction, the pandemic restricted us to just stay at our homes, so we no longer socialize with other people, and we no longer spend our time with our peers and teachers, and we only talk with our intermediate family members. But I have read somewhere that prolonged isolation can also affect the brain and verbal memory recall. So yes, it did affect.
All right, is there any other questions? Okay, so why do you think the pandemic brought negative effects towards students' study habits when they had more time to study?
Okay, so I think the pandemic brought negative effects towards the students' study habits, because although they have more time to study, they tend to procrastinate. They love to, as I said before, they love to do their work at the very last minute. They would put it off and probably do it later. They think they have more time. The many times they have they have to study, they use it to do other things, such as playing online games, watching movies, and many other unuseful activities. So that's why I think that the pandemic brought more negative effects.
All right, thank you, Aziza. Now, we will be moving on to our next presentation. A warm welcome to Noor Amira Yasmin.
Thank you.
Please allow me to share my slides. Hello, I'm Noor Amira Yasmin binti Ahmad Hartino Suhardi from Yayasan Sultan Haji Hasan Bolkiah Secondary School, Brunei. Today, I will be talking about the effects of COVID-19 on culture and how they have affected the cultures in our lives. Firstly, I will start with the definitions of COVID-19. As we all know, according to the World Health Organization, coronavirus disease, known as COVID-19, is an infectious disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus, which can spread from an infectious person's mouth and nose in small liquid particles when they cough, sneeze, speak, and breathe. There are effects and changes that come with it to prevent more infections. Now, what are the effects of COVID-19? Since the beginning of the outbreak, there are some obvious adjustments planted into our daily lives that we must adapt, which are social distancing and the requirement to wear a face mask. When Brunei Darussalam recorded its first COVID-19 case on 9th March 2020, social or physical distancing within at least 1 meter between individuals was to be adopted to avoid close contact. Certainly, mass gathering must be avoided to comply to the social distancing requirements. Recalling the operational readiness level 3 of the easing of restrictions following COVID-19 Brunei Darussalam, which dates to 17th August 2020, mass gathering was limited to less than 350 people for each event, including all the guests, hosts, family members, committee members, catering staffs, and anyone who is present at the event. Attendees arriving and leaving at separate times or taking turns to attend an event was not permitted. In other words, staggered arrivals were not allowed. Event organizers were required to encourage attendees to practice physical distancing, for instance, by arranging the seats at least 1 meter apart during the event. However, there are places where social distancing cannot be practiced, so there must be another strategy to protect ourselves from the virus. Back in June 2020, World Health Organization recommended that healthy people wear non-medical masks to control the spread of COVID-19, especially in settings where the physical distancing cannot be achieved, or in closed public spaces such as supermarkets and classrooms, as wearing a mask can protect others from contracting the virus, even though they do not prevent the mask-wearing person from infection. But why non-medical masks? This is because they reduce the spread of droplets and infectious aerosols. However, the US Embassy in Brunei Darussalam stated that starting June 1st, 2022, outdoor masking is no longer mandatory here in Brunei Darussalam, but it is still encouraged, especially in crowded places, and must be worn indoors. So, how have these effects of COVID-19 affected the cultures in our lives and society? First, requirements for social or physical distancing have contributed to the limit of mass gathering and adjustments in various places and activities. For instance, Hari Raya Idul Fitri, which is celebrated by the Muslim community all over the world to conclude the Ramadan holy month of fasting, has not felt the same for 3 years since the COVID-19 outbreak. Usually, on the morning of the first day of Idul Fitri, men perform prayers at the mosque. However, to comply to the social distancing requirements, they were advised to perform ablution at home and maintain the 1 meter space between each individual while praying. The first 3 days of Idul Fitri is often when families hold open houses to catch up with each other while sharing a variety of traditional delicacies and desserts. Unfortunately, because some borders are closed, those with family outside of their own country had no choice but to see each other through video calling apps such as Zoom. So, due to the virus, the celebration for this year's Hari Raya Idul Fitri was not as festive as it used to be. On the other hand, this pandemic had also changed our methods of education. For example, school was conducted online, which eventually led assessments being set for online too. In fact, Brunei Darussalam was one of the countries where the exams could not take place due to the pandemic. Just last year, due to the high number of local COVID-19 cases, the Ministry of Education did not give permission for written exams to be carried face-to-face, as the students' and teachers' safety is their utmost priority. So, the written and face-to-face Brunei Cambridge GCE, OAS, A-Level, and IGCSE October-November 2021 session was cancelled and replaced with an alternative format, which is the school assessed grades known as the SAG. Now, should we embrace this new cultural change? It may all seem like a minute change, but COVID-19 is responsible for a huge number of deaths globally. Moreover, little is known about this continuously evolving pathogen. According to Nature.com, variants such as Omicron and Delta carry mutations that blunt the potency of antibodies raised against past versions of SARS-CoV-2. Researchers are promptly trying to characterize the highly mutated Omicron variant. However, its rapid rise in South Africa suggests that it has already found a way to dodge human immunity. How this virus evolves throughout the months and years will determine whether it will become another common cold or something more threatening. The same article states that as more countries lift restrictions to control the spread opportunities increase for SARS-CoV-2 to make significant revolutionary leaps. Therefore, it is evident that we have no choice but to embrace this new cultural change for everyone's safety. That is all for me today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Amira. Now it's time for a Q&A session. Does anyone have a question that they would like to put forward to Amira?
I have a question. Yasmin, what have you learned from this research?
I realized that anything could come our way at any given time, be it something foreign to us or maybe something we've experienced before. In this case, COVID-19 was actually an unknown pathogen for quite a while, and as I have mentioned earlier, we still don't know what it is capable of. So from this research, I learned that sometimes we have to embrace something in order to overcome it, such as accepting the effects of COVID-19 as a new norm to reduce the spread. I hope that
Alright.
answered your question.
All right, so now we have another question. How do we help students who have been affected by the pandemic's effects?
We could help them by giving them tuitions, or just simply giving them more notes by giving intensive classes.
All right. Does anyone else have a question for Amira? Okay. So other than what you have mentioned, what else can we do to prevent the spreading of this disease?
We could perform the antigen rapid test, which is the ART, before going and after coming from a place to make sure you're not infected.
All right. Is there any other questions? Okay. Are there any struggles that you personally face from the pandemic on the social perspective?
Personally, now, I found it more awkward to interact with people right after the virtual learning and the lockdown. Yeah, I found it hard to interact with people, but it wore off after some time.
Okay. Does anyone else have a question that they would like to put forward to Amira? Any questions from the YouTube live? All right, so that will be it for this Q&A session. Now, we will be taking a short 5-minute break and we will be back at 3:55 p.m. See you all then. And welcome back, everyone. Let's enthusiastically welcome our fourth presenter, Lim Yujia.
Thank you. Please allow me to share my slides shortly. Are my slides visible?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, hi everyone. Very good evening to everyone present here, the committees, and to fellow delegates. My name is Lim Yuja, and I'm from Catholic High School, PJ, Petaling Jaya. And I'm beyond grateful to be able to join this forum about effects of COVID-19 on culture. As you can see what's being presented on my screen, today what I would present would be the effects of COVID-19, specifically on work culture. So right before I start, here's a short summary about what I'll be talking about. Firstly, what was it like before the pandemic? What happened after? And at last, what should we expect to come next? So what was it like before COVID-19 hit us hard? So if you could simply run through your memories, this probably doesn't need that much of an explanation, but just in case, here's a little recap. So back then, for most people, adults mainly, I'm pretty sure that just confirm, are my slides running?
Sorry, they're not.
Oh gosh.
I think they're still stuck on the first one.
Okay, is it available now?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I'm really sorry for what happened just now. So I'll just run through really quickly. The table of contents would be what happened before, after, and what should we expect next. And then what was it like before COVID-19 hit us hard? Run through your memories, and it doesn't really need that much of an explanation, but just for recap, pretty sure for most adults, going to work meant a fixed schedule. That means a 9 to 5. By that, it also means that there is a very clear and concrete work-life boundary. As the moment you step out of the office, the moment you put that work card in the machine, that means you're officially off work and go back to your life, the life that belongs to you. But since the pandemic struck, where we had to move everything online, where we cannot meet physically, that's when technology came in. For example, modern collaborative technologies such as video conferencing, screen sharing, digital shared file storage, simultaneous multi-authoring of documents, and so many more, that has undoubtedly helped us cope with the sudden change. So remote working has given employees, or maybe even employers, space, and it also allowed them to complete their work how they think in a way that how they think it's best. Maybe so it's different from getting monitored physically, like you're having your supervisor behind you staring at a computer screen. So remote working gives employees or workers more space to do things how they like it's done. So yes. However, the accelerated adoption of these tools, where we just go into the online world, has given a misleading impression that a physical presence is actually unnecessary. However, that isn't really true too, because the thing is, face-to-face still matters because it creates rapport and trust between co-workers or between you and your employer. So when you are with a person physically in the workforce, you could build a relationship and you could read. There are things that you couldn't find online, for example, non-verbal cues, their facial expressions. So that proves how significant meeting physically or socializing physically is, how important it is. Another thing is that just being present in the workforce, just being present in the office itself, shows that you've at least made the effort to come. So it could demonstrate your commitment to the workforce. So here's a quote that I relate a lot, even though I'm not working as a student, that people find meaning in their daily rituals of getting ready to leave home, commuting, grabbing their cup of coffee, and filling their water bottle before sitting at the desk. So these rituals of going out, having a routine, maybe meeting people also, is what gives meaning to lives of workers or students. I'm putting students in because we are students, right? So moving on to the cons of remote working. Firstly, diluted boundaries, as you could see. Home workers, they do not receive significant signals about when they should stop. They do not know because, you're confined to your screen almost 24/7 at home. So they do not receive signals or they do not receive orders that, oh, you can go out. Even like after your work time, you still somehow have to go online to reply to your boss's messages or something like that. So whilst office workers, they do the moment they walk out of their office building at the end of the day. So at least you don't feel that obligated once you're out of the office because you know that is the time for your life. It's not the time for work. Here are some statistics provided by the World Economic Forum. So as you could see, there's quite a number, around 50% of people find it difficult to achieve a work-life balance after the pandemic to some extent. Another thing is that they find difficulty getting work done at home due to inadequate office setup or equipment. So that also reflects on how remote working is affecting affecting workers' productivity and so on. Another thing about remote working is that not meeting people physically, face to face, means social isolation. Well, this may seem, okay, this might be aggressive or it's maybe too much, but here's an analogy that you could imagine. So prisons have social confinement, confinement cells for a reason. So just by, locking yourself up and confining yourself to a screen, it means social isolation. Though there are video calls, you could say that there are video calls and online meetings that helps you communicate with others, keeping engaged. But it's harder for someone to take the initiative to socialize or chat when they don't meet physically unless really necessary. It's just like how we students, we don't know who our classmates are the moment we go back to school from online classes. So basically that's how it works now. Remote working might also, so based on that, consequently, remote working might also result in the fact that employees don't know who they're working with, or they might not even know who their employers are. And that isn't how a team works. That isn't how you could build a team because it isn't a team. You don't know who you're working with. So about social isolation, here's another statistic provided same by the Economic Forum. So this actually differs maybe because different countries have different cultures and the personality also differs. So you could see there are 75% of people that feels socially isolated or they feel lonely when working from home, while there's just only 24 in Japan. Maybe if you're into the cultures of different countries, you might see that there's actually a pattern. In Asia countries, they might feel less isolated, probably because that we're just a little shy normally in our work life before even. So yeah. Okay, furthermore, what's next? As the pandemic switches to an endemic right now, or when everything is allowed to go back to normal, at least slowly, a choice should be made by employers, maybe. a choice which is a type of work culture that allows maximum productivity and also ensures the well-being of an employer as well as the employee. So among the choices options we have for workers, I believe there are only three. Number one, going back physically to the office, remote working, or there are some companies that are implementing the hybrid working mode. However, there isn't really a definite solution. I mean, this is untold, but I don't need to say this out, but there is no definite solution because every field has different needs to fulfill. And it all depends on what's best for the company and what's best for the workers. But mainly, I believe it's more on the employers, what's best for the corporate and what's not. So for example, you could find that hospitality field, it's basically impossible for them to implement remote working, while in finance and tech companies, they're more likely to have their workers work from home because going to work isn't really necessary for them because you're also facing the screen somehow. And that marks the end of my presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Yuja, for that insightful presentation. Now, does anyone have a question that they would like to put forward to Yuja?
I have a question. So during COVID, you know that students are studying from home and parents are working from home. Do you think it has increased the workload on women who are wives and mothers too, as they have to take care of the needs of the whole family throughout the day, as well as work online? Or is it the other way around, like it's convenient for them to work any time of the day and avoid that rush in the morning, as they do not have to make lunch for their kids or to worry about their toddlers, and do not pay for the daycares of the toddlers? So what do you think?
So thank you for your question. And actually, I agree with the first point where it's actually increased a workload, not only on women, but on parents that stay at home. Because when you're staying at home, you basically have to put on your role as a parent. You have to put on your role as a mother, a father, someone who cooks for the family, someone who do household chores. So as I said, being present means something. So you have to, you'll be obligated to do so. You have to work. I mean, if you're working, you have to work. At the same time, you also have, take care of your child studying in the other room. So it really is an increase in workforce, no matter how we shape it. But because you're there, you have the role and you have the responsibility to do it. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
All right. Does anyone else have a question that they would like to put forward to Yuja? All right. So we've got a question from the YouTube Live. What do you think about employers forcing their employees to return back to the office, even though their jobs do not necessarily need them to be in the office?
Okay. So once again, I really appreciate your question. So about employers forcing their employees to return back, I guess there always has behind everything that happens, there must be a reason, right? So there's no point of the employers, turning on their air cons, having their office, the rental fees are a thing, right? There's no point for them just forcing them back and they're paying for them. So I guess this may be related to productivity. Maybe they find that the employees when they're working remotely, they can't, supervise them better. That creates, maximum profits for the company. So it is still in the rights of employers to have, their workers go back to the office so that they could ensure the productivity and everything, the flow is smoothly running throughout. Yeah.
All right. Is there any other questions for Yuja from the YouTube Live? All right. So in your opinion, what do you think? Which one is better, work from home or face-to-face, as both has its own pros and cons?
So when both has its both pros and cons, I think it would be best to consider like what field are you in, what job are you taking. So for example, working from home, it would be better for those, maybe tech. But the thing is, when you're around people, when you're surrounded by people working together, you have the motivation and you have the obligation to actually work hard, maybe. At least at home, no one's supervising you. You're alone and only you yourself know your progress. So you might be slacking a little. So to me, working face to face would be a lot better because that motivates me and that's how human psychology works.
All right, thank you. Is there any other questions? Okay, so there have been cases where employers reduce the allowance given to their employees due to them being at home. What do you think about this?
Okay, so I guess this is a response from the question before. So in this case, if reduced allowance, I don't think that's actually quite valid, because if they don't have a reasonable they don't have a actually valid reason to cut their allowance, for example. But there are sometimes that allowance given, for example, the allowance for them to commute to the office. By cutting that down, I think it's quite reasonable because you don't need to commute and thus there's no need to claim those allowance, right? But by just cutting down their allowance without giving them a valid reason, I think that's basically exploitation, and the employer is just using the COVID situation to do stuff. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Is there any other questions? Okay, so do you think that employees working from home should be paid more?
This is a contrast of the question before, right? So working from home, the employers wouldn't need to pay the rental fee. I mean, if the company switches completely to working from home, the employer doesn't need to pay their rental fees. So I don't think an increase in allowance when you're working from home actually applies, unless when you say you're working from home, you don't have specific working hours. You have to be online 24/7. Well, that's a totally different case. So it actually still depends on the cost, the cost from working from home or the cost working from the office. And also don't forget that your ability to work as an employee, that is also taken into account, right? So yeah.
All right, thank you, Yuja. Now, we will
Thank
be
you.
moving on to our next presentation. Let us welcome Zonia Amir to give her presentation.
Please allow me to share my screen. Is my screen visible to everyone?
Yep.
I'm going to start with my introduction. Hi, I'm Zonia Amir from Pakistan. I'm an A-level student at the Crescent Model Higher Secondary School. Talking about my interests, I love crafting and helping my mother with household chores and assisting my siblings in studies. In short, I love to put effort into providing comfort for my loved ones. And for the same reason, I've always been involved in environmental conservation programs about making this earth a safe and sustainable place for all. And that is the reason I'm here today at Saeyls. I want to connect with people all around the globe through this platform and share my views and opinions on the topic effects of COVID-19 on culture. So, when we take a trip down our memory lane, when families, friends, and coteries used to assemble at one place to celebrate their cultures and carry out traditions that have been around for many generations, they were comfortable with sitting together, playing together, and eating together. Whether it's the Lantern Festival of the Chiang Mai, the summer moon parties in Greece, or the Japanese flower show, These events always foster a sense of pride within the community and engage its members to strengthen the relationship between them. It enhances the feeling of hometown pride, contributing to the advancement and the development of the community. Not only this, it helps boost the local economy as the cultural events attracts the visitors who spend money, increasing the financial resources of both the festival side as well as the country. But unfortunately, with the increasing grip of COVID-19 on every continent, cultural events have been cancelled, cultural institutions have been closed, and cultural practices have been suspended. The pandemic is not only a medical phenomenon, it has also affected individuals personally, socially, and economically. Certainly, such closure seems immaterial as compared to the public health crisis that are caused by the pandemic and the rising death rates. People are suffering. They're paying more attention on how to stay safe and access care. They're stressing more about their health and paying less attention on building a relationship with the community and with the loved ones. Moreover, the public policy is also focused on the health sector and the cultural sector is being neglected. uh, Concerts are being cancelled. For example, festivals are being postponed, delayed album launches, and cinemas are being closed. And according to Statista, the global film industry has recorded a US $7 billion loss in the revenue. Other than that, the lack of a healthy relationship, healthy communication between people has left a negative impact on their mental well-being. People are getting depressed about their jobs and the well-being of their loved ones. It has hindered spiritual growth as well as reduced effectiveness in work. This is because effectiveness is directly linked with physical movement and mental stability. Now, the question here arises that what can we do? Should we embrace this new change, and what are the ways we can come out of this? So, in my opinion, culture and communication, even during the challenging times, should not be overlooked. Rather, it should be embraced as a mean of relaxation, escape, and nourishment. Temporarily, you will feel completely immersed in a festival like Holi or lose yourselves in the blossoms of the flower show. In a long run, it's a source of overall satisfaction and happiness. At the time when misinformation, polarization, and blatant hate are problematizing, culture can be humanizing and educational. It is an alternative mean by which to digest an increasingly complex and anxiety-fueled world. However, standard operating procedures must be taken into consideration when attending social gatherings. Also, look for other ways to boost your social engagements and personal growth to provide you mental peace. There are a lot of ways you can do this. For example, you can have coffee or tea time with your family. You can exercise, do yoga, or meditate. You can babysit your grandchildren or help them with homework. You can get engaged in religious activities and build a relationship with God. You can use Skype or FaceTime to catch up with friends and family from a distance, or you can sign up for an online class to learn a new skill. So, in my opinion, while some of the damage might be self-repaired after the pandemic, we can still build back in ways that offer greater resilience in social and community relationship. Although online ways of relation can never replace physical interactions, through the internet, we must offer help, we must build trust and express love. We must work towards building the sustainable world and avail every opportunity to test new forms of cultural production compatible with the conditions with which we operate. To conclude, I want to say that there is a need to acknowledge how distancing has fueled mental illness and hindered the blossoming and development of the community. At times when misinformation, polarization, and blatant hate are prevailing, culture can and should bring us together and restore hope and confidence. We should take these crises as a reset button and avail every opportunity to build a more stronger and more connected world. Thank you. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Zonia, for that insightful presentation. Now we will be moving on to the Q&A session. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask Zonia?
I have a question. So, wait, okay, I'm allowed to speak, right? Okay, so in your slides, I recall that you mentioned that mental health of people is at risk, while the world is putting it is at risk, and while the world is putting its focus heavily on treating the pandemic and preventing other diseases. So that was the situation before. But as both our mental health and our health are important for the well-being of a person, and now when the world is slowly transitioning back to normal, at least in my country, and I believe other countries as well, do you think mental health would still be a threat? Or in other words, do you think there is a need to shift these resources aggressively to tackle this issue of mental health?
So thank you so much for asking this question. So I believe that even if everything goes back to normal, there is no surety that people will be at mental peace because they have lost a lot during the pandemic. People have lost their loved ones. They've been jobless for months and months. They've lost their savings and they're suffering physically as well. So, mental health should not be ignored, whether if we're living in the time of crisis or if we if everything's normal. We must provide comfort to each other. We must build trust with each other and must support each other in every situation. As I believe, when we're mentally at peace, we are more able to tackle situations efficiently, and we'll be able to get out of this in a better way if we're mentally at peace. Hope I answered your question.
All right, then. Is there any other questions for Zonia? Okay, so we've got one from the YouTube Live. A little bit of a sidetrack, but what is your hobby during the pandemic to keep yourself sane?
Okay, so I started reading books because before the pandemic, I did not have any interest in reading. I used to focus more on my academics, and but during the pandemic, I started reading a lot, especially the books that are written in my native language, and I started learning that language in a better way. There's this very famous book, Shahab Nama in Urdu. I started reading that, and I'm I'm just focusing. It's a very meaningful book, actually. Other than that, I started helping my mother with household chores as well as I mentioned before during my introduction, and my siblings with studies. Apart from that, I attended a couple of internship programs that were aimed at making this world a safe place for us, for everybody. That includes one by WWF and the Japanese Virus Technology Program by United Nations Association of Pakistan. Yeah, that's it.
Wow. All right. Does anyone else have a question for Zonia? All right. So, how to keep your mental health more stable?
The very first thing that you can do is to let go of all the negative thoughts. Always focus on the positive stuff. Keep your eyes straight to your goals. Try to fulfill them. Keep your attitude positive, and always look to a situation in a very positive way. We don't know what happened to us. We cannot control the problems that come in our life, but we can always control how we tackle them, how we tackle those problems, and how we interpret those problems. If we interpret them in a positive way, then we're able to respond to them in a better way. Yeah, that would bring mental.
All right. Now, does anyone else have a question that they would like to put forward? All right. So, how do we get our parents to understand what mental health is and how we need to maintain it?
Okay, so for me, I have a very good bonding with my mother, and I could just go straight to her and tell her how I am feeling. And parents these days, I believe, are cooperative and they're understanding because they're educated. They're not living back in the 90s or the 80s. So they're very understanding. You talk to them, you just don't fight with them. You don't be aggressive. You try to explain your point to them and how you are feeling and what change do you want in your surroundings to bring you mental peace, and how if you are mentally at peace that will affect and bring a positive change in the household, and how you can set an example for your younger siblings as well, so they'll understand.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Does anyone else have a question? Any questions from the YouTube live? All right, so we've got another one. What should one do if they already succumb to mental health?
See, just everybody has flaws in them. Try to bring a positive change in yourself. Try to accept that you cannot be perfect, but you can be a better version of yourself. That's it.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Is there any more questions? Anything from the YouTube live? All right. Okay, we've got another one. How do we break the stigma surrounding mental health, especially in the older generation?
As I've answered it previously, that we should try to talk to them in a better way and try to convince them about the positive impacts that if they understand what mental health is, will bring upon upon our generation and the next generation, as well as the people we're surrounding, and how that can bring a positive change in our lifestyle as well. Just try to make them understand that thing.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Now we will be taking a short 10-minute break. We will be back at 4:50 local time. Sorry, I apologize, 4:40 local time. All right, welcome back, everyone. Unfortunately, Shalini will not be able to join us today. I apologize for any inconvenience caused. Now, our forum for this session has come to an end. First and foremost, thank you to our panelists for providing their insightful views on the topic, Effects of COVID-19 on Culture. Thank you also to everyone who attended this forum. We hope it has benefited you in some way or another, and we hope to see you in the next session tomorrow, Modern Leaders, the Root of Global Issues. For all the participants, please do stay in the meeting as we'll be having a quick photo session.